This is Jamie Dyer welcoming you to another edition of the Watching the Wireless podcast. It's been a while, but while we're in the midst of lockdown, why don't we talk to some presenters about what they've been doing during lockdown, as well as the news that's going, because, you know, even though we are in lockdown, everything is still moving on, and boy, has it moved on this week. But we'll talk about that in just a little while. I've got with me Harrison today via, I normally say the medium of Skype, but we're using a system which I'm sure he will explain to us. We've got Harrison here today.
Hi Jamie, good to be here.
So, Harrison, tell us a bit about the show you do, or the shows, I should say, and what you've been doing during lockdown.
Yeah, sure. So just before we begin, you mentioned what we're using to record this podcast. It's IPDTL, which I've used pretty much every day, I'd say, in the last 10 weeks for something. So to present my radio show live from home, it's really simple, because all I do is just dial into the studio, my audio goes down the line and gets broadcast, obviously, and I can hear the output from the playout system coming back as well. So that's been really a simple process, thanks to this. Also, for recording phone interviews as well, there's a built-in VoIP system, so you can make outgoing calls, and you can do the same for ISDN as well, but I haven't needed to use that myself. And obviously, it all records in this system, which is in the browser, which is really cool. Massive shout out for Kevin and Inquality Media for their solution, which has kept so many presenters connected with their audiences during these challenging times, and obviously a time when presenters arguably have been needed more than ever. So massive shout out to them, and I'll send my invoice tomorrow, guys. No, I'm just joking. So I was really worried about my weekly routine being completely and utterly thrown out the window by this when the lockdown was first announced, because obviously, as you know, I have Asperger's, so it's been quite difficult to adapt to this new routine of being at home and not being able to do many of the things that I obviously did before, and my routine changed quite significantly last year as well, so I've had to adapt to that, and now I'm having to adapt again. It's been very difficult, but obviously, you know, it's been a while now, so I'm getting used to it, and I can't wait to obviously do the things that I did once upon a time again. So obviously I miss all the towns and cities and the restaurants and the coffee shops and the peaceful, cozy venues where I used to go and relax and escape, if you like. But my radio and audio work, without a doubt, over the last 10 weeks has been an absolute joy and a lifeline. You know, as much as I miss going into the studio, the wonders of technology, as I was just explaining, mean that I've been able to spend the last couple of months broadcasting from home. And it's been fantastic. I've really enjoyed it, you know, being able to open my window and, have my own room where I sleep in. I'm doing the show from here. It's a novelty, and I'm sure a lot of presenters will concur with that at the moment. So much of my time during the week has long been, and unfortunately still has been during the lockdown, as well as doing the presenting stuff. It's also been taken up by producing audio imaging for clients. So I work for Crumble Fruit, which is an audio production company, and we work with radio stations and podcasters to give them a fresh sound. Most recently, I provided a local podcast, Cranley Community Radio, with a package of sweepers, and also the student radio station at Hull University, Jam Radio. We did an imaging refresh for them because they've stayed on air to entertain listeners during the pandemic, which is fantastic for a student radio station. Massive props to them. But other than that, I present a show on Way Valley Radio every Saturday afternoon, a local community radio station in Alton between 2 and 4, and I've been with the team there since January. I'm also involved at Petersfield Community Radio, and a lot of time has been spent remotely, of course, with the team there, because we launched a daily roundup of important information called the Morning Report back at the beginning of lockdown, and it's still going. We haven't missed a single weekday, and I've honestly learnt so much from those guys, that, you know, the guests we've spoken to as well, real people with real stories during, and I'm going to say it, unprecedented circumstances. Yeah, we're hearing that a lot at the moment, but it's true. These are unprecedented times and challenging ones as well. And just this week, we've had 2 nurses working on the front line speak to us with an extraordinary account of what they do and how they're coping, which is an incredible interview. So we've spoken to local businesses, local people raising money and supporting the community, and it's just amazing. I honestly couldn't imagine what these last 2 months would have been like without that to keep me busy and to keep me socially connected, because I've always said that we should be socially connected whilst being physically distant, and I think I definitely have been, and I'm so grateful to the team there for allowing me to be part of it, and it's been an absolute joy. I've really enjoyed it. Just a few shout outs actually for people at Petersfield Community Radio. So Steve Martin is one of the project's founders, and he is just an absolute genius, an absolute pro, and he's done so much for the project. I've known him a while through radio work, and one day he just asked me if I'd like to join, and I said, yeah, sure, why not? And it was actually the best thing I've said yes to in ages. And I always go on about it being a lifeline over the lockdown, doing the work there, And, I'm not sure they realise how much of a lifeline it's been for me. I'm just so grateful. I've really loved every minute of it. And I'll just mention the other co-founders as well, because we literally wouldn't be here celebrating this success over the last few months without these guys. So Dave Bowers has a journalism background. He's done a fair bit of radio in the past, and he actually sent a tweet about 10 years ago inquiring about a project like this in Petersfield, and it's finally happened. So chances are it literally wouldn't have happened at all if it wasn't for that man, who we like to wind up a lot, but he really knows his stuff, so it's great to have him on board, and he's a fantastic asset. And also Richard Gaisford, who's been involved from the start. You may know him as chief correspondent at Good Morning Britain. And obviously it's really useful to have these people with professional broadcast media experience on board, because they can then train the others who are joining us from all other walks of life. And they're joining, obviously they want to be on the radio, who doesn't? But it's also because they're passionate about the town where they live, and they want to provide a service for the people of Petersfield, and that is really special. We've got more and more volunteers joining us each week, so, the team is growing, and yeah, it's just going really well, and I'm just loving being part of it. And we announced a few weeks ago, really exciting, that as lockdown starts to gradually ease, we're going to launch a new 24/7 radio station for the town. So about time. Petersfield is one of those places where the community is really connected and very close together, obviously metaphorically, rather than physically at the moment, but it's been great to keep the town connected. And obviously this new radio station is going to have volunteers, people that live and work in the town, presenting and producing programs. And we can't wait to get it off the ground. With the extra time that many of us have got at the moment, we thought it'd be a great opportunity to speed things up with the project and get that off the ground quicker than we'd initially expected, but it's going quite well at the moment. We're hoping to get that underway maybe next month at some time, which is really exciting. So I've been involved behind the scenes recently as part of the programming team. So we've been getting all the music together, categorising, configuring the playout system, all the geeky stuff essentially, but also the really important stuff to make sure that we position ourselves right and, establish a station sound that appeals to that core audience. Because, Jamie, I've mentioned this to you before, some community stations don't seem to know who their target listener is. And they often just say, well, the most important thing is that we have a big library and we don't want to repeat songs all the time like commercial stations do. I mean, yeah, that's a good idea, and it does give you an edge over many commercial stations, but actually the most important thing is to have that station sound. No one's going to listen to Calvin Harris followed by the Everly Brothers. Do you know what I mean? Or Enya followed by Martin Garrix. You need to offer, you can offer variety, but you need to make sure nothing jars. So, specialist shows in the evening, absolutely fine, totally different, but daytimes I think should be consistent. So we've been working on making sure that we've got that bright sound for our daytime rotation. It's getting the mix just right has been keeping us all very busy, and we're hoping to launch that service very soon. So keep a lookout, and I'll keep you updated on my social media.
Yeah, and will that, because Petersfield is quite a remote area, isn't it? Will that be online only to start with, or will it be an RSL? What's the plan at the moment?
Yeah, so we're going to launch online to start with and consider other options further down the line. So, for example, Ofcom's announcement last month of small-scale DAB licenses being advertised at some point, that's definitely worth looking at. But for now, we're just focused on getting this off the ground as soon as we can. And given the demand for it, we think that this is a real opportunity for us. And, as you said, Petersfield is very remote. It's very well connected, and following the success of our on-demand content during this, we're going to continue doing that as well on the side. We feel it's a great opportunity to enter the market. And in all honesty, getting people to change their listening habits, it's a huge challenge. I think sometimes it's often underestimated. We've just got to make sure that we get it right. We've got to offer a unique, distinctive product, and we're working towards that. I think that's what we're going to be able to deliver. I mean, as I said, we've got a team who really know the patch, some well-known voices. I hope Susie Wilde and Joff Lacey won't mind me highlighting them in particular. So yeah, we're really looking forward to entering this new era and hopefully expanding at some point in the future.
That's excellent, and I can hear from your enthusiasm, you've got buckets of it. Obviously, apart from what you're doing at the moment, what are you generally listening to on the radio? Who inspires you?
It's a really good question, and, I couldn't possibly list everyone that I look up to and respect in radio because I'd be here all day, but three people that spring to mind instantly in music radio specifically, Ken Bruce, Steve Wright, and Pat Sharp. And the reason being, they each have a unique style and a distinctive character, and it always shines through on air and always puts a smile on my face. Having grown up listening to them, it's almost like they've been with me personally my entire life. And that's what makes radio so special. There's so much in a voice, so many memories associated with listening to them. And with Popmaster, with Ken Bruce, it's one of those features that you just have to turn the radio up when you hear it and play along, and it's really gripping, and it's something that that Popmaster music brings back so many memories for me, and it's something that I still really enjoy. As I've got older, in fact, I've enjoyed it more because I've been able to actually play along with the game. With Steve Wright, I mean, the stuff that he gets into on his show and the work that goes into preparing his show every single day, the effort that he puts in is extraordinary, and I really admire that. Not just his unique sound, but also the effort, as I was saying, that he puts in beforehand to make the show what it is and to make his output as good as it can be. And with Pat Sharp, well, I mean, he's just such a character, such a unique voice and funny guy, and it really makes my day on a Saturday and Sunday listening to him on Greatest Hits Radio, which I know we're going to be talking about a little bit later on. But I really do find those three in particular in music radio such inspirations. And, despite having my own style on the radio, I think that's really important for everyone to have their own style and not just copy someone else. But, there's bits of every other style that you enjoy that you can take and kind of morph into your own. And, it's really helped listening to all these great presenters over the years to come up with a style of my own. And these are geniuses. And, they're still as good as they were back in the day, in my opinion. And, look at Steve Wright. I mean, some people might say that he's been doing it too long. He has now got his biggest ever audience. So, I'd say that the act still works, and the show that he does is still fantastic and still loved by so many. In speech radio, because I listen to a lot of speech radio, so a lot of LBC and 5 Live, and really looking forward to Times Radio, and also BBC Local Radio as well, which is something that I'm very, very passionate about. I think it's fantastic. I listen to Around the Dial a lot, listen lots of different presenters to see what's going on, really, just to be nosy, essentially. When I listen to speech radio, so Ian Collins, I used to listen to him on LBC at night, and he is one of the best in the business, without a doubt. I mean, the stuff he used to do on TalkSport was very entertaining, and listening back to the old shows from him and those in his day as well, like James Whale and Tommy Boyd and Caesar the Geezer. All of these people have their old stuff is definitely worth going back and listening to. I often find myself going back through the archives and listening to old shows because it's so very entertaining and it makes a very enjoyable listen. Ian Collins is still at the top of his game on the Talk Radio afternoon show, and I went and saw him in Kent at the BBC last year, which was an absolute joy. He's inspired me a lot. As you know, Jamie, I know you are a big fan as well. Ian Lee and Catherine Boyle are a really unique double act. And, the show that they do is just so random. There's so much nonsense, and it's just so funny. There have been so many laugh out loud moments on their show on Talk Radio, by the way, which is Monday to Friday, 10 till 1 at night. And it's just such a great listen at that time of night. You never know what's going to happen. You never know what a caller's going to come on and say. And it's just so entertaining. And it's the perfect end to my day. And it makes me realise at 9 o'clock, when a lot of people think, this is the end of the day, I'm going to go to bed soon, I'm thinking, I've got 3 hours of absolute roller coaster radio to listen to in an hour, and I just can't wait to get into it and find out what's going to happen tonight. And it is just such a joy, and as I say, Ian and Catherine are without a doubt my favourite thing to listen to on the radio, and I'm sure you will concur with that, Jamie.
Oh yes, my wife and I are definitely keen listeners to Ian's programme. There's a different vibe than the others, and some nights are better than others if you're looking at it from a wide perspective, but most of the time the quality is pretty high. And of course Ian himself has spoken about obviously mental health issues and kind of important things, so it's not all frivolity.
I often refer to a quote from the radio futurologist James Cridland, and I agree with much of what he says when it comes to the radio industry and the way that audio is changing. The radio needs to ensure that it's real and relevant, and Ian and Catherine's show could not be more so. I mean, it's real human stories, sometimes light-hearted, sometimes really heavy and emotional, as you were just saying. I mean, the fact that they've created a space where people feel comfortable being so open and honest, especially on national radio at that time of night, is quite remarkable, and I learn a lot and sometimes gain inspiration from hearing those experiences. As I said earlier about the interviews for Petersfield Community Radio that I've been doing, during the pandemic, it's real stories from real people going through it. And, Ian being so open about his struggles and the callers that have followed, it's definitely inspired me to speak out and gain more of an understanding about the different things that people go through, and the difference in tone with some callers that are on for a laugh and it's all a joke and it makes me laugh out loud, and then you've got those callers that come on with those really challenging situations, and it is one of the most open and honest things on the radio in this country.
Into another area that we wanted to talk about, because obviously this week the whole radio industry has just completely blown up. And the thing is, right, is that to the outside world, to people who don't follow kind of the mass amount of radio in the country, it seems like all is lost, for those areas that are affected. But last year we saw Global do a very similar thing. So we know that it's kind of the second wave of that. It's a very weird time, and certainly in the last 48 hours since that story broke, a lot of people in my local area, of which a local station round here is affected by the news, it's completely blown up. People wanting to save it, and upon researching it seems that all the other areas that are affected, some are more concerned than others, but then I think it depends on people's relationship with the radio, which is still very strong. So obviously, given the news, and unless you've been under a rock for the past few days or so, Bauer have just announced that they're going to rebrand a load of the stations that they bought from people like UKRD. There's about 50 stations in total. Some are keeping their names and obviously going to syndicate into the network, but most of it is going to be on the Greatest Hits network, which upon looking at it, I'm quite impressed.
Yeah.
But what do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I've been listening in and out for the last 18 months since it first launched, and it's a very slick product. It's very impressive. And obviously, it's got a very strong lineup. I was mentioning Pat Sharp earlier on and his show at the weekend, which I listened to, which is very entertaining. He is a great entertainer, exactly what you want from a radio presenter, especially in these times. And I imagine that lineup is only going to get stronger as this station is rolled out. So, as I was saying, it's only been on air a year and a half. Of course, it stemmed from the Bauer City 2 network on a couple of FM and several medium wave frequencies in the Midlands and the North. And it's already on quite a number of DAB multiplexes across England as well, so including the one here in North Hampshire, which is operated by Arqiva, and it's on several across the country. So yeah, there's also of course the stations in Scotland, mostly medium wave, but a couple of FM frequencies. They're all still using their local names though at the moment, so Clyde 2, Forth 2, West Sound and the like. But yeah, as you were saying, around 60 local stations across England and one 46-year-old AM station in Wales going to be joining the Greatest Hits radio network and rebranding, and it means the end of heritage names, of course, like Spirit in your hometown, which has been on air since 1996, and for many it will have been a companion throughout their lives, and obviously it's a really upsetting situation when your local radio station, your favourite radio station, it knows the area where you live and it's passionate about it in the same way that you are. It's really sad when you lose that connection. And the same goes for Spire FM. I know people at both stations, so I know firsthand just how hard the teams have been working over the years building these stations, and it makes it hit home even more. Take Spire, for example, the role the station played keeping local people informed and entertained as the world's media were on the ground in their city after the horrific poisoning incident a couple of years ago. Scary, uncertain times for the community, and Spire was there using the really powerful but simple line, "We live here too." And so what's happening and what has happened in the last 10 years, it's really sad in terms of local radio and what's been happening in this country for years, for decades. So as for some of the others, we know Lynx and Pirate are remaining as standalone stations, so I guess you'd put them in the same bracket as Wave 105 in Bauer's portfolio. And obviously Nation Broadcasting bought some of the acquired stations last year because of ownership rules. So you've got Sam South and KCFM in Hull rebranding as Greatest Hits Radio, and that's as part of a brand licensing deal. And same goes for the Breeze South, so that's the Winchester, Southampton and Portsmouth FM licenses becoming Hits Radio and taking the National Breakfast Show from Manchester. So I'm guessing that's kind of a trial to see how it performs outside the city, and in another area of the UK. Going back to the Greatest Hits network, there's also Minster and Yorkshire Coast and Radio Wave, and as I mentioned, not by name a minute ago, Swansea Sound, which is one of the oldest ILR names. They're all going to disappear soon. Stations in the same Ofcom approved areas are going to be able to merge and take the same regional show. And everything else will be networked across the country, just like what we saw with Global last year. And as I said on Twitter the other day, it's utterly heartbreaking. It gives me a bad taste in my mouth. It really does, because I know so many great, talented people who are affected by this decision. And it's really sad, as I said, for the audience as well, who have grown up with these stations over the years. But I will just make the point that, at the same time, I'm not one of these people who just slags off the big groups and shouts, how dare you, you're disgusting, because they're not doing anything wrong. It's been allowed, and the time for people to speak out was a good 10 to 15 years ago, and consequently we are where we are because nothing was done. And in fairness, it is becoming more and more difficult for local commercial stations to be viable businesses, and many rely on national ad revenue from other sources. And I thought it was frankly ridiculous that the CMA wasted a year investigating that whole deal. I'm glad it kept Friends in a job for an extra year, but the FRS debacle, what was that all about? Bauer own 100% of the business now anyway. So they just literally wasted time, trying to stop Bauer from getting in with FRS, but it's happened. So it was a complete waste of time. And obviously that small Wolverhampton license, which they've also taken on. So I don't really know what that investigation, why it went on so long, but there we are. But in terms of the strategy, I'm surprised that Greatest Hits is the first in years to fill this gap in the market with just 70s, 80s and 90s pop music, because if you look at the other brands which have expanded using local and regional licenses, Capital, obviously CHR, primarily aimed at mid to late teens and early 20s. Heart has obviously shifted significantly younger in recent years after ditching the 80s and playing a lot more recent hits, so last 10 to 20 years, and obviously the Hits Network in the north and in Scotland. So obviously with the exception of Smooth, which we know is a totally different product, they're all young brands. And I think Bauer are being very smart rolling out the older AC brand. And in my opinion, it just reinforces the value of targeting that demographic, because these are people who have traditionally listened to FM radio generally. For any community station, maybe looking at what's happened and possibly thinking, we need to ditch the classics they're playing and just go for a totally different audience, possibly a younger one. That is a real risk because, I'm relatively young. I know how hard it is to get a younger audience listening to particularly FM radio, but local radio. And all you'll do by going younger in many cases is just alienate what you've got. And you don't want to abandon your existing listeners. You want to keep them. So, keep doing what you're doing and make sure you're offering a distinctive product from your competitor, which may be Greatest Hits Radio. But, maybe get some more songs from recently in rotation, which would still appeal to your core audience. But don't ditch the songs that your audience love just because your new competitor is going to be playing them as well. You can still play the same music. Lots of stations in lots of areas play the same sort of music, but you've got to offer a distinctive product in terms of the content, and that is, of course, what it's all about. And it comes back to that quote I mentioned earlier about real and relevant. James Cridland actually said in that context of live and local, and saying, it's more important long term that radio is real and relevant as opposed to live and local. And, I think the Bauer strategy is right. At the same time, what's happened with the destruction of local radio in this country over the years is a really sad one, because local radio is still relevant, particularly to older audiences. And what the BBC are doing, it's a totally different product from commercial radio. It's relevant and it's also local as well. So, you can do good national radio and you can do good local radio. But I would suggest that a lot of listeners to these stations who are obviously devastated about their local station closing down. I was in Basingstoke with Kestrel all these years ago when it became The Breeze, and obviously it's becoming Greatest Hits now. But I would say that a lot of listeners are going to be surprised by the product in early September, because I think Greatest Hits Radio has real potential. It is a strong brand with a strong lineup, great playlist, and I think it's going to be popular. I really do. I think, people are just reacting to their local radio station closing down and the anger and the heartbreak of that. But actually, when Greatest Hits Radio comes along, I think people are going to be surprised. I think it's a very slick sounding station, and I think it's definitely got potential across the country.
I will put an argument to you right now. It's just come into my head, and allow me to put my cynical hat on, because the thing is, I'm 30 years old, you're under 25. I tried to get into the industry and then decided maybe podcasting was more my bag. I can tell by your enthusiasm and the way that you talk about it and your anarachiness that you're interested in that, as am I in some cases. If somebody came knocking, I would certainly give them the time of day. Obviously, where are those future jobs when everything's nationalised like that, when everything's kind of on a national brand and you only need one presenter instead of 10 for the various stations? Where is your next opportunity going to come from?
Yeah, I mean, sadly, that's right. It does limit opportunities. Back in the day, both before my time and growing up as a young kid, you could just get in touch with the local radio station, which very often broadcasts from studios in your town, and sometimes, even just down the road. And you could send demos on cassette or CD or write letters and get your foot in the door quite easily if you're passionate enough. But nowadays, of course, with less stations, it's obviously harder because you've either got to work your way up to the top in commercial radio or with the BBC, or get in with BBC local radio, and obviously, increase competition because everyone's going to the same place to try and get in. So, there are still opportunities out there. I mean, they're limited, as you were saying, but there are still opportunities out there. So definitely don't give up if this is what you want to do. I mean, this week was Demo Factor for student radio, and Paul Sylvester, who's the content director at Absolute Radio, who I've got a lot of time for, I think he's fantastic. He gave away a show on Absolute Radio to the winner of Demo Factor, which was incredible. So, and it came as a massive surprise to Alex West, who got it. So, it is fantastic opportunities like that, but obviously they're limited, so it is going to be more difficult. But you just got to look out for the opportunities and grasp them where you can. So, for example, last Christmas, Radio 1 giving new talent the chance to present their own show over the festive period. What an opportunity! I mean, that is as big as it gets, really, isn't it? Radio 1, for your break. So there's that, and you never know, that may come back again later this year. Obviously, Global and Bauer both have their academies, where you can make connections and get opportunity to get some experience. And BBC Local Radio's New Voices initiative last year, and even just by making connections and networking and getting yourself noticed, you could be onto something. So I'd say to all the young people out there looking for a career in radio, don't give up. Even if opportunities are limited, if you're passionate and hardworking, I'm sure the dream isn't over.
Yes, it's about adapting to the current situation. We're all very sad. Make no bones about this. I realise there are some people very upset by this news. There's going to be people who this affects drastically, and it's very sad that they've lost some of these heritage names and things of that nature. But obviously there are so many more opportunities. And I mean, I started doing internet radio about 10 years ago. For those people who don't know, I started off on Stump Radio, which then became Endeavour FM, as it is now in Boston, Lincolnshire. And then went into internet radio. And really, before then, I was very much of the opinion of, well, internet radio, that's not real radio. Especially, I'd done internet radio before, but it was in a studio because Endeavour tried online for a while, and then I moved away and came to a place where there wasn't anything. My local station, Spirit, I had a chat with them, but obviously handed in my CV, no opportunities at that time. So I went onto the internet, and that was 10 years ago. Doing it from home. And of course, I think now, because of this coronavirus thing, everybody is going to start realising, wait a minute, we don't need £5 million studios. We can do it from home and have it sound mildly decent. And it's boggled me, really, that it's taken something like that, something devastating and horrible, to make people realise, because certainly when I ran Southwaves Radio about 5 years ago, I was all about getting people to do stuff from home, and I had to explain what I meant. I don't think I'd have that problem anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the technology has long been there, but it's really become clear in the last couple of months just how easy it is for people to do their work from home. Not just radio presenters, but also people working in offices and call centres, and obviously going back to radio and other industries as well, the sales staff. I mean, obviously tough times for business and consequently advertising, so some are currently furloughed, but when they return, they could easily do what they do from home. And I'm not sure, as I've heard some people suggest, that large sections of the radio industry are just going to suddenly turn around and close their offices and studios and just continue everyone working from home. I think the fact that some studios, especially those of Global, Bauer and Wireless, were so expensive to build, it means that they're looking forward to getting presenters back in to make use of them. But the point stands that it's not really necessary when remote broadcasting is so simple.
When I've looked at the backlash that's happened to Bauer over all of this, it's mainly people saying, oh, but they're for the community. And I think a lot of the things they were describing, certainly with those UKRD stations, Spirit, as you mentioned, Spire, Minster, those stations that were all in that network, they all pretty much did a very similar thing. They had very similar features and ideas about how to run local radio stations. Most of those were proper local radio, as they term themselves. And people seem to be getting confused between radio for the community and community radio, which are two different things. And I think as we see this changeover to greatest hits, what we will see is that community radio will have to step in, because people are going, oh, but they did this for free, they did that for free, they did that for free. And you think, but that's the job of modern day community radio stations.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are some top-notch community stations out there providing that good quality local service. And obviously, many of them don't have access to the same technology and resources as commercial radio. So again, coming back to my love of BBC local radio, massive props to them for stepping in and finally giving stations access to their content. And I think in order for the community sector to improve and step up as much as possible to fill that gap that you mentioned, I think there's got to be more content sharing going on, whether that's with local organisations, the local news media, maybe, and of course the BBC. And going back to what I was saying earlier, you know, some community stations just need to work on positioning themselves, because some will just say, well, we're targeting everyone in the local area, but that doesn't work. Every radio station needs to have a target demographic. And obviously there's specialist shows, as I mentioned, aimed at niche audiences, which is fine. But, you know, overall, you need to get the music mix, you know, during the day and the overall station sound right. And I also think it should be a level playing field in terms of local advertising now. So, you know, currently Ofcom say that any community stations that are taking more than £15,000 per annum in commercial revenue have to balance it with additional income from other sources. So I think that's something which should definitely be reviewed, in my opinion. Would you agree?
I think so. I think community stations will have to step up, as you say. Unfortunately, that £15,000 sounds a lot in certain parts of the country, but in other parts, what with rent and all the other costs that are incurring, it could make it harder. I think as well, isn't there some kind of rule that if it's within the reach of a commercial station, then obviously their revenue is much reduced from a community perspective?
So that's only if the commercial competitor is based in the area and is not co-located with any other stations.
Yeah, there we are.
So they're restricted to the £15,000 full stop, although I'd say those community licences are few and far between, or at least they will be soon.
And I'd like to say, actually, to the listener out there, if you're listening and you're either a radio anorak or you're in the industry, or maybe you're both, most likely to be that, then if you are affected by any of these changes, whether it was last year with Global or this year with Bauer, please do come on this podcast and tell us what you've done. Not necessarily, I don't want you to come on and Bauer bash. I don't want that to become a phrase, but, you know, please come on and tell us what your skills are and all that sort of thing. Come on and basically flog what you do and try and help reach a little bit like Radio Today, but not quite as powerful and not quite as influential. But, you know, always that's kind of what this podcast is about. As is evidenced by the fact we've had Harrison on here and you've done most of the speaking because you have such a great manner of which you speak. You know, it's wonderful. You mentioned earlier that you're on the autistic spectrum. You've got Asperger's syndrome. For those who don't know, I am also on that autistic spectrum. I was diagnosed with Asperger's nearly a decade ago. I personally don't always mention it because sometimes people can see it as something of a setback. But hearing you talk so eloquently kind of is against that theory, isn't it?
Well, thanks, Jamie, and I'd say the same about you. You know, I've never viewed Asperger's as a disability. It's just part of who I am, and, you know, it makes or has made certain situations challenging in the past, and there are situations which might be considered insignificant to the average person, but to me it's overwhelming and anxiety-inducing. But overall, I think there are many benefits, and I find it really easy to focus heavily on the things that interest me, which is why you've just had to put up with me rambling on for the last half an hour or so. But in all seriousness, it's no big deal. You know, I'm different. You and I are different. We're all different at the end of the day, and just as well. Otherwise, I think life would be very boring.
I echo those sentiments, and under normal circumstances, I find it difficult to communicate face-to-face with people. But if I'm doing something like this, it's almost like I'm playing the role of an interviewer.
Yeah.
And so my body language reflects that as well. And that first time where the light bulb goes off. I mean, I was at a food festival, and I was almost rogue. I was just recording for a podcast that I was thinking of starting, took a portable mic round, actually walked up to people and said, I'm from this, you've never heard of it, because I had to have a brand name. It was Southwaves Radio at the time, and just started talking to people, and they were saying, I like the fact that you're not kind of intimidating, you're not in my face. I kind of stood back somewhat and wasn't interrupting them. People will probably notice that even with Harrison here, I'm letting him say stuff. I don't like to interrupt him too much, which has been praised. So, like you say, it is something of a superpower, and we all have our issues, and some of them differ. But I think it's definitely a strength. And I mean, I can tell you that certainly I very much was into media in general, and then went on to radio, and then eventually kind of fell out of love with music radio, went into speech radio, and found people like James O'Brien, Ian Lee, James Whale, those people, and was like, this is really talking to me. And so now this is kind of what I do now. I did hundreds of music shows, but I haven't done a music show for ages. And I think it is that being able to concentrate on one particular thing, and like you say, it becomes your life. I present about 10 podcasts simply because I love it. When I used to do music radio, I'm sure you can get behind this. When I used to do music radio, I started off basically doing a lot of the modern stuff, basically playing all the latest records and stuff, but I had nothing to say about them because on the side I'm into sort of stuff from the 1940s to the 1960s, and then eventually I started doing that, but it was like, but I can't bring any real life experience, so it's sort of one extreme to the other. Didn't have the passion for one thing, didn't have the life experience for another, and then I basically landed on the 90s, of which I grew up in. And suddenly I'm playing these records and I'm able to say, well, I used to hear it through the bedroom wall, and things like that. Suddenly you're able to inject just that little bit extra. And obviously I do podcasts on old-timey stuff, a lot of radio shows from the 30s to the 50s, and I'm very passionate about that. But being able to inject that real-life experience, and I think we're mentioning Ian Lee a lot in this podcast. I once heard him speak to a caller who said, oh, but Heart are ruining it, and he said, look, try not to think about Heart, don't think about Heart or any of those other stations that are doing what you don't like. He said, go outside, go to the cinema, go to dinner with somebody, go to the park and look at the birds, get some life experience, sit down in front of a microphone and talk about it. I thought that was a wonderful way to put it, and it's certainly something that I've tried to live by ever since I heard it. Now, I think we should probably draw an end to this podcast, because I'm sure we could go on for hours about this. The longest podcast of which I've done quite recently. So, Harrison, thank you so much. Remind us again.
Thank you.
Remind us again of the shows that you do.
Yeah, so Saturday afternoons between 2 and 4 on Way Valley Radio, a local radio station in Alton, and also various bits and pieces for Petersfield Community Radio, which is an online kind of podcasting platform, soon to be launching a new 24-hour station for the town. So really looking forward to that, and various bits and pieces with audio production work as well via Crumble Fruit, which is the company I work for. And I'm online as well on Twitter at HarrisonRB Radio, and also on my website at harrisonrb.com.
Wonderful. And obviously to the listener out there, if you want to get in contact with the podcast, you can tweet me at WatchWireless19 on Twitter, or Jamie Dyer89 if you're not fussy about reaching the podcast. But I get a lot of tweets, so if I don't get to you straight away, please don't be offended. Right, so thank you very much, Harrison, for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Jamie. It's been great to talk, and no doubt we'll catch up again at some point. Take care.